Good morning. How's everybody doing? Are you guys good? Yeah. Hey, so this morning I promised, last week we talked about ladies and how the women in our life matter and how important you are. So this morning we're talking about men. And so men, do you remember the TV show with Tim Allen? What was the show called? Remember that? So men, I need you to practice real quick. If you just like ladies, look at your husband, and when he does this, go, like give him kind of you're the man kind of look, all right? So here we go. I want all men just on the count of three. All right, here. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, that was kind of weenie. Let's try this again. Ladies, you can get in on it so you can prove your man, like just show him how to really be a man. All right, so on the count of 3, everybody kind of take a deep breath. Ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, you're ready. All right, that's good. We're ready to be men. I was thinking about coming up here and how do you get men ready for a sermon about men? And I thought about giving you kind of the Braveheart inspiring speech, where I'm freedom and we all go out and fight. And I thought, what is better than one inspiring speech than 40 inspiring speeches, all right? So I got a compilation of 40 of the most inspiring TV, movie kind of speeches ever. You put it together, and I want you guys, I'm hoping, men, this gets you pumped. Are you ready? Are you ready? Okay, again. Ladies, would you hit your husband? Again. Men, are you ready? Like a bunch of dying seals out there. All right. Here we go. Roll that beautiful bean footage.
Will you fight? No! We will run! And we will live!
Shame on you. This could be the greatest night of our lives. But you're gonna let it be the worst.
And I guarantee a week won't go by in your life you won't regret walking out, letting them get the best of you.
Well, I'm not going home.
We've got too far! And I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I'm not saying it's gonna be easy.
You're gonna work harder than you ever worked before.
But that's fine, we'll just get tougher with it.
If a person grits his teeth and shows real determination,
failure is not an option.
That's how winning is done.
Believe me when I say
we can break this army here.
And win just one for the Gipper.
But I say to you, what every warrior has known since the beginning of time,
you've got to get mad.
I mean plumb mad dog mean.
If you would be free men, then you must
fight to fulfill that promise. Let us
cut out their living guts
1 inch at a time.
And they will know what we can do.
Let no man forget how menacing we are. We are lions.
You're like a big bear, man.
This is your time.
Seize the day.
Never surrender.
Victory or death.
That's the Chicago.
Who's with me?
Clap! Clap! Don't let him die! Clap!
All right, let's fly!
And gentlemen in England, now our bed shall...
No! But I tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take
our Independence Day!
Are you inspired, men? Huh? Yeah. All right. Hey, there is something about a good inspirational speech, isn't it? Just get your guts going. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to fight somebody. There is something about being inspired. And ladies, I want you to know, I'm hoping that today is inspiring to you too. Obviously, the stuff that we're going to talk about is not just for men, but I tried to kind of gear this message towards men and really look at some things that I thought were important for men. So I hope, ladies, that you'll still get something out of this. But men, I want to just for a moment, we're going to land on some stuff and then we'll kind of jump off of that and we'll end church today. But before we end, I want to jump and land on some things. And the first thing that I want to say to you, men, is that you matter. I don't know if you really realize that, but men matter in our world. And you need to know, you need to hear it from somebody that you matter. Each and every one of you are vitally important to the world that we live in. Your kids need you like crazy. If you have kids, if you're a parent and you're a father, you need to know that your kids, you matter in your children's life. I don't care if you've been the worst father that anybody has ever had in this world. You still matter. This blows my mind about kids, but you can have a horrific dad. And for some reason, there is still this biological imperative inside of a child that wants to have a relationship with their father. Today could be the day that you turn that around and you become the man that is worth being called your child's father. Today could be the day. I want you to know, men, you matter. You matter to your wife. If you're married, if you still are in a married relationship, you matter to your wife. She needs you to be present with her. She needs you to be available to her. She needs your strength and your calmness under fire. She needs you. You matter to your wife. You matter to society, men. Our society has turned on men a little bit. I think in trying to elevate women, which is not a bad thing, please don't hear me saying that we shouldn't have elevated women and brought them up from the status that they were in 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. But in doing so, oftentimes what has happened is the status of men has been driven down and the expectations on men has been lowered. And you can look in schools, girls are doing better in schools than boys. Boys are just, it's kind of okay for them to just fritter along and be funny and be kind of the goofball. And the expectation right now in society on men is that you just be a Homer Simpson, right? That you just sit back, eat your donuts, and drink your beer, and as long as you push your button at work, everybody's happy with you. And that's the expectation. And I'm telling you, our society needs men of substance in it. And you are that man. It's not up to somebody else, it's up to me, and it's up to you. And I want, if I can get across one idea this morning, it is simply this. I'm kind of tipping my hand to you before we go any further. It's that men, you matter. And I want, whether you believe it or not, you may feel like your entire world is out of control. You may feel like you have very little influence over anybody or in any arena of life. But I want you to know the areas that you do have influence, you matter greatly. And you cannot underestimate that. It is so vital for you to understand that, and for this morning, for you to clear away all the junk that says, as a man, I don't need to sit here and think about the deep parts of my life. I don't have to like it's okay for me to just live surfacey. I'm inviting you this morning to be a true man, a real man, and to actually go beneath the surface and really think about who you are, what makes you what defines your character, and what gives you integrity or helps or causes you to lose your integrity. And I want to ask you as a man to really stand up and evaluate who you are and who you want to be in God's presence. Is that cool? So this morning, with all this in mind, we're going to go to 1 Samuel in a moment. 1 Samuel chapter 14, if you guys want to get there. 1 Samuel is a book that is you can look in your table of contents. It's in the Old Testament. It is before Jesus, quite a bit before Jesus, so you know that. And it's after Moses, all right? So if you've heard sermons before and you've heard those two characters, it's somewhere in the middle of this, all right? We are actually catching up with the nation of Israel. They have become a nation, and they have asked God if they can have a king. God has given into their request, and he said, fine, yes, we'll let you have a king. And he gives them a king named Saul, all right? Saul is tall, he's handsome, he's good looking, but we're going to find in a little bit that he's kind of a mess. Saul is a little bit of a mess. And so we're going to actually this morning focus in on 1 Samuel 14, and we're going to look at Saul's son Samuel, because Samuel is, I'm getting all my guys mixed up. We're going to be looking at Jonathan. Now, as you're getting there, I want you to know, here's kind of the three things that I want to talk about this morning, and it are three ways, men, that you can distinguish yourself as a man of valor. So I'm hoping that, men, I'm going to give you just a moment. Wives, if you have one of these, give your husband a pen. Men, if you don't have a pen, get one from your wife. Look in the booth and the pew in front of you. Pull out a pen, get a piece of paper to write on, because we're going to look at three things that can distinguish you as a man of valor. All right? Here we go. Let's read from 1 Samuel 14, 1 through 5. It says this, one day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor bearer, come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side. But he did not tell his father. Saul, who is his father, was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree in Migron. All right, so you get this picture. Jonathan the son says to his armor bearer, this is the guy that carries his armor for him. He says, let's go out. We're going to go out to where the Philistines are on the other side of from where we're at. And we find out that his dad, who is the king, who is the leader of the nation of Israel, is sitting underneath a pomegranate tree, kind of shading himself, right? That's how I picture. I picture him with a couple ladies fanning him, and he's just sitting there. But Jonathan decides to get up and go do something. It says this, that with him, with Saul, were about 600 men. Now, it sounds pretty impressive until you go back and you read in 1 Samuel 13 that Saul had a huge army of men with him. There had been this moment where Jonathan had gone and he had attacked and done some military maneuvers, and he had kind of inspired the nation of Israel. They had all come together and they were waiting for Saul to step up and be a leader and kind of give them direction, but Saul doesn't do it. And what happens is that while they're waiting, the Philistine army comes and they start to amass, and there are thousands of them. As a matter of fact, the scripture says it was like looking out at the sand on the seashore. When you saw the Philistine army, you just looked out and there was an ocean of men waiting to attack the Israelites. Saul doesn't really lead. It doesn't say that, but we kind of guess by the kind of the way the scenario is described, because what starts to happen is men start to leave. And they start to go back to their homes. They go up into the cliffs and the clefts of the rocks, and they're hiding out. This is the same kind of region that today there's so much turmoil over in kind of the Middle East, and you've maybe seen pictures of like the kind of rocks and caves that people remember Osama bin Laden and how he would hide out in the cliffs and the rocks. It's the same kind of area that these guys are in. And so people have gone and they're hiding out, and they're afraid of what's about to happen. And we find out that Saul only has 600 men left with him. It says this, among whom there was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. He was the son of Ichabod's brother, Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. He's just going out on his own. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez and the other Seneh. One cliff stood to the north towards Michmash, and the other towards the south, towards Geba. Jonathan said, listen to this, Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. Now, what you have to know is that this moment, in my mind, seems a little crazy. Jonathan, we're going to find out, is going to go up and he is going to fight an outpost of men that has about 20 men in it, all right? So 2 men against 20 is pretty unfavorable odds, isn't it? Not only that, Jonathan is going to go up and fight these guys, and what he is doing is going to incite war, right? Up until this point, the Philistines have camped out. They're waiting. We assume they're trying to figure out exactly the best way to start going in and hunting down the Israelites in these rocks and caves. But what Jonathan is about to do is to incite war. This is a big step that he's undertaking. Men, I've studied this passage. I've thought about it a lot, and I was thinking about just some things that distinguish Jonathan from the other people that are in the story. And one of the things that really hits me is that one of the first things that really distinguishes Jonathan as a man of valor is that Jonathan was a man of action. Jonathan was a man of action. If you want to distinguish yourself as a man of valor, be a man of action. Be known as a man who stands against evil and fights for what's right. If you want to be a man of action, a man of valor, you will be a man of action. You see, Jonathan is in the middle of this huge, potential war. And one of the things that strikes me, because it seems crazy, doesn't it? Jonathan is going to incite this big battle. He's going to cause this big fight. Why in the world, if you're safe and you could just hide under a pomegranate tree, why in the world would you ever go and try to get the battle going? But Jonathan knows something that you and I may not even think about. Jonathan is the son of a king. And if the Philistines attack and they catch him, guess what happens to Jonathan? He's dead, right? Jonathan is going to be killed, or at the very least, sometimes they would maim them horribly, cut off their thumbs and their big toes, or they might poke out their eyes, or they might force them to kind of be like a slave to the existing king to show their power. I mean, this is the kind of stuff they would do. And what Jonathan knows is that he potentially is going to die if they just sit there and do nothing. Do you see the contrast between him and his father? His father is this imposter. His father is this man who's supposed to be a leader. He's tall. He looks the part. He seems like he's this powerful man. But what is his dad doing? He's in a hammock under a tree, cooling off, sipping on a little something under there, right? Saul is over here lounging around, waiting, not doing anything, not leading. And Jonathan is being a man of action. He's not just sitting around letting something evil in this world take over. He says, did you read what he said? Let's go back to that real quickly. If you could go back to the 1 Samuel 14. He says, perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Jonathan is not just merely going out and acting and doing stuff on his own. He is trying to follow God into something. And he's saying, we cannot just sit here and allow evil to live in our world. We have to do something. Men, can I ask you a question real quick? In your workplace, when somebody asks you to do something that is kind of shady, doesn't feel right to you, when they ask you not to break the law, not to do something that's completely wrong, but just fudge the numbers a little bit, they ask you to just change when you came in and when you left. They ask you to just push the person who you're trying to sell the product to, push them a little harder than you feel comfortable, than you feel is right. Can I ask you a question? How many of you men stand up for what's right? See, I think most of us struggle with being Saul and Jonathan. Most of us want to be a Jonathan, want to be the one who is a man of action, who stands up and goes and does what's right. But I'm telling you, a lot of us become the imposter who sit and hide and want to wear the title of king, but want to sit and hide under a pomegranate tree. Do you agree with that, men? In your family, how many of you stand up and do what's right and ask the hard questions and push into your family and just discipline your children and get engaged in the process and actually care about your wife and her emotions and care about what's going on in her life? How many of you are actually engaging on a day? How many of you are being men of action? See, it's easy to become the Saul in the story. It's easy to sit under the pomegranate tree and just relax and just let things go on as they've always gone on and just pretend like there isn't a horde waiting to come and destroy you. But I believe a man of valor is a man of action. He is a man who gets off his rear, and when there is something right that is supposed to be done, he does what's right even when it's hard. See, I think what makes a man tough is his willingness to act and do what is right even when it's hard. Most of us when we think of a tough man, we have this picture of the big football player and the guy who's just built and ripped and he's tough. And I'm telling you, I have known men who are scrawny little guys who have stood up to do what's right, and I would put them up against anybody in the category of, are they a tough guy? Because being tough isn't about whose face you can pummel in the best, right? Because there's going to be a day, some of you know, there's going to be a day where you can't pummel anybody anymore, right? I remember the first time, have I told you about the first time I beat my dad at arm wrestling? Have I told you this story? One of my favorites. My dad, I have arm wrestled in my entire life, and most of my life it was like this. You ready, son? And he'd always say, right before he'd go, it's all in the eyes. It's all in the eyes, And I'd kind of giggle, and then he would slam me, So my whole life, my dad, just no mercy. Ready, boy? It's all in the eyes. And so I'm in college. I've been working out a little bit. I come home, and I'm like, hey, Dad, you want to arm wrestle? And he's like, yeah. We sit down and lock up, and I go, it's all in the eyes, Dad. And he kind of has that look in his face like, uh-oh, what's going on? And I go, and I slam my dad. And he goes, best 2 out of 3? And I'm thinking, yeah, I've got this guy. I've got this sucker. So we lock up again, and he goes, remember, Ken, it's all in the eyes. And I'm like, yeah, it's all in the eyes. And then my dad does something that totally throws me. He goes, and bites, just chomps down on my hand and slams me, and he goes, done, never arm wrestling again. Because you see, there's a day, men. There's a day when your physical strength is going to wane. Amen? There's a day when you're not going to be able to do the things that you used to be able to do physically. But there is a way that you can still remain a man of strength. And for men, I believe it lies in our character. And not just a man of strength, but a man who continues to become stronger and stronger to where your wife in your older years will look at you and say, you are not the man I married, and I am so thankful for it. Because your character is so deep. The strength within you is so strong. I trust it. I trust it. You see, I think that comes from you being a man of action about right and wrong. That you are a man who does not rely on the physical outward things, but you're a man who relies on the depth of character that God wants to build inside of you. And I believe for you and I that lies in us doing what's right, even when it's hard. You know this was the sin of Adam, right? Adam watched his wife do something that was wrong, and he did not say anything to her. He just sat back. And then when it came time, when God came and said, hey, what's going on here? Do you remember what Adam said? That woman you put me here with, she ate the fruit. Adam sat back. Saul follows in his footsteps. And I would bet, men, that you and I struggle not to follow in his footsteps. Be a man of valor. Be a man of action. Do what's right, even when it's hard. Suck it up. And be a man who does what's right. Do you know there was a guy who did a study, I can't think of his name all of a sudden, but he did a study. There's a great movie about it on Netflix called The Experimenter. And he did a study in the 1960s where he studied why it was that the Germans in Nazi Germany were able to take seemingly good people and cause them to do horrific things. Have you seen that? Have you heard about this study? It was called the Obedience Study. Maybe you heard about it, maybe you didn't. What he would do, he would take somebody into a room and he would tell them to push a button. And on the other side of the wall was a person who was supposed to be taking a test from the person pushing the button. And if they got the answer wrong, they would push the button and it would supposedly send an electrical shock to the person on the other side of the wall. And each time they got the wrong answer, the shock would get stronger and stronger. And so initially, you hear he pushes the button and the guy on the other side of the wall goes, ugh. And then pretty soon, the guy on the other side of the wall is going, stop, please stop. And the guy who was kind of observing the whole thing would say, please continue, push the button, ask the question. And the person pushing the button would look back at the guy saying, please continue. And do you know what he'd do? Push the button. Over and over again. As a matter of fact, I think it was something like 70% of individuals would push the button, even to the point where they would get to the point where the person on the other side of the wall had been screaming and screaming, and then finally they pushed the button, and there was silence on the other end. And the person who was being observed would turn around and say, something's wrong, you need to go in there and check him and see if he's okay. And the guy doing the testing would say, he's okay, push the button. And do you know what the person would do? They'd push the button. Because inside of us, we have this desire, even if we know something's wrong, we have this desire to obey authority. And what I'm not advocating that you go out and you just totally disobey authority and you don't do, but what I am advocating is if you know something's right, that you do it. That you be a true man of valor. Men, you know that there's peer pressure, and there's a peer pressure among men that causes us, when we're all standing around and some guy's got a beer in his hand and you've got one in your hand and you've just been fishing and they're making the jokes and they're doing whatever, there is that pressure for you to become one of those guys. What would it take for you to stand up and be different? What would it take? Jonathan, 1 out of 600, actually 2 because his armor bearer's with him, 2 out of 600 go and do something that's right. They go and fight for what's right. What would it take for you to be one of those men? What would it take for you to be one of those men? We continue. I'm going to go back to verse 6, if you would, on 14. 1 Samuel 14, verse 6 says this, Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Remember, we read this. He said, perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. And listen to what his armor bearer says. This hits me like a ton of bricks. His armor bearer says, do all that you have in mind. Go ahead. I am with you, heart and soul. Can you imagine this? Now, you might not know this because you haven't read chapter 13. But what chapter 13 tells us is that only 2 men in all of Israel had swords because the Philistines had taken out all of the blacksmiths. And so there are only 2 men in all of Israel that have swords, and they are Saul, who is underneath a tree shading himself, and it is Jonathan. This means that his armor bearer is wielding like a pitchfork or something, you know? Like that's all he has. He doesn't have a sword. He doesn't have a weapon to go fight with. But when Jonathan says, let's go up to these men, there's hordes of them, I know, but let's go up and fight. Do you know what his armor bearer says? He says, I am with you, heart and soul. You see, I think the second thing, if you want to distinguish yourself as a man of valor, the second thing that you have to do is you have to be intentional with the relationships that you invest in. Get this, because who you invest in today may be who you have to put your trust in tomorrow. Who you invest in today may be who you have to put your trust in tomorrow. Jonathan knew. He had been intentional about investing into this man's life. He knew who he was, and so when he picked, out of all of the men that he could have picked any fighting man and gone up and said, you, come with me. Do you know who he picked? He picked the guy who carries his armor. That's it. The guy carries his armor. He is a servant, but Jonathan invites him to go up the hill with him. He invites him to go into the battle with him. Men, can I ask you, what kind of other men are you surrounding yourself with? Are they jokers? Are they the jokers who are good fishing buddies and they're good for a laugh and they tell a dirty joke occasionally and you think it's funny even though you know you shouldn't? Is that the guy that you spend your time investing in? Or do you invest in men who tomorrow when you need them are going to be men that you can trust? I don't know how many men I have had come into my office usually it's with their wife because she's forced them to come because they don't want to get any counseling or help and they don't usually want godly advice. And they come in and you start to dig into their life and you find out that they have been talking to some other guys that they hang out with. And those guys are really fun to be around, right? They tell the funny jokes, they throw the great party, they're just a blast to be around. But when life goes south, you know what their advice usually is? Man, I don't know why you put up with her so long anyway. Right? Wives, how many of you want your husband around that guy? Right? I don't know why you put up with her junk. What? Man, you know what it's like being out here single and just hooking up with the ladies and it, right? That's what these jokers that most of us hang around with are like. Men, who you are investing in, that means who you are spending time with, and who you're spending your time not just near them, but in proximity, where you actually have you talk and you have some sort of relationship. The guy that you're going out fishing with, is he a man that is worth investing in? Because I am guaranteeing you this, who you invest in today is who you're going to have to trust tomorrow. And if you are investing in jokers, that tomorrow when you have to trust them, I guarantee you there's still going to be a joker. There's still going to be a joker tomorrow because their life hasn't changed. Yours has. Who you invest in today is who you're going to have to trust tomorrow. Jonathan knew this guy was probably not the biggest or strongest guy because his job is to carry the armor, right? He's not the guy that they put out to fight Goliath. But this is the guy that Jonathan wants going into battle with him. And why? Because this guy says, do that you all that you have in mind because I am with you, heart and soul. I have 5 guys in my life. All of them I've known since high school. I was blessed. I was not particularly smart in high school, but I was blessed that God brought these 5 guys into my life, and they have been men that I have been connected with ever since, and they are men who challenge me. They don't just, if I'm doing something that's wrong or I'm doing something that's not right, you know what? They don't joke about it. They're not like, oh man, that's awesome. They push me. And they're like, I don't know that you should be doing that, Kent. Do you need some help? Can we walk with you through this? These are men that when I'm with them, they make me want to be a better husband. They make me want to be a better dad, right? Are you investing in men like that? Are you investing in those relationships? Because if you're not, I'm guaranteed I have gone through days where I've needed to trust in somebody, and every single time those guys have been right there. Basically, we're with you, heart and soul. My guess is most men in this room don't have that relationship. Most men either isolate themselves or they get involved with these jokers, these yo-yos that nobody needs to be hanging out with, and they're making stupid decisions, and when you need to trust them, there's still going to be a yo-yo. Men, Could I encourage you? Find other men who want to be men of strength, who want to be men of valor, who want to be great fathers, who want to be great husbands, who want to be great at their job, who want to work hard and live a decent life that's good and that is honest and that cares about other people. Find those men that are around you and invest in a relationship with them. Because someday, you're going to have to trust in the other men that you've invested in. And I'm hoping, for your sake, that you've invested in the right kind of men. That's the second thing you can do to distinguish yourself as a man of valor. Third one comes from the next portion of this passage. 1 Samuel 14:8 says, Jonathan said, "Come on then, we will cross over toward them and let them see us. If they say to us, 'Wait there until we come to you,' we will say where we are, or we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands." So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. "Look," said the Philistines, "the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in." The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor bearer, "Come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson." So, listen to this, Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet with his armor bearer right behind him. Do you guys ever see the movie The Princess Bride? Oh, classic. If you haven't seen it, it's a classic movie. This totally reminds me of the scene where the Dread Pirate Roberts is climbing up the rock, and he's climbing up a rope, and he's going to get up there, and he's going to have to fight Inigo Montoya, and they're going to sword fight. This Jonathan and his armor bearer this is not an easy climb. They're not going up and going to be on even ground. If you know anything about warfare, being on the lower side of the hill is going to be a big problem. Climbing up to where these guys is a big problem. But Jonathan and his armor bearer do it. They have guts. They're men of valor. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet with the armor bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer followed and killed behind him. I like to think with a pitchfork. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed some 20 men in an area about half an acre. That's about the size of my backyard. These guys go berserk on them, and they take them to town. These are men, and they're fighting. And I want you to notice, Jonathan doesn't say God's going to make us look good. He says this is for the nation of Israel, right? This is for Israel. This is for God. Then verse 15, then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp and field, and those in the outposts and raiding parties, and the ground shook, and it was a panic sent by God. What will happen is the Philistines will begin to turn and fight one another. They likely don't know what's happening, and they all of a sudden just see a battle rolling out. Who knows if this is late at night or early in the morning? But they're like getting like crazy, and they don't know what to do, and they're fighting each other. And Israel realizes it. The men that are with Saul realize it, and they come out and they begin to fight, and they begin to go after the Philistines. And there is this huge victory that happens because Jonathan and his armor bearer took a risk. Jonathan, who knew if the Philistines came and took over and found Saul and his men, Jonathan, who knew he was going to die anyway, took a risk for God, trusted God. And this is what, as I thought about this, it really hit me that the third way that you can become a man of valor is that you live your life as a catalytic man. You don't merely just respond in life, but you inspire others. You become a catalytic man. Jonathan and his armor bearer, they go and they fight, and it inspires all of the rest of Israel. Actually, the rest of the people who had left and fled, they had flown and they were left with 600 men. When the news gets out that there's this battle ensuing and the Israelites are chasing the Philistines, what happens is the rest of the fighting men start to come back out of the cliffs and the caves, and they come to join the battle and fight. All because there was a catalytic man who did what was right, and he was willing to not just respond in life, not just wait for stuff to happen to him, but he inspired. When I think about catalytic men in my life, I think about the elders in this church. And I don't just think about the elders that are present elders, I think of the men that I at least know who have been elders in this church. Because I know for a fact, sitting in the meetings that I sit in with our elders, that these men are catalytic men. What I mean by that is when they feel like and believe like God is calling them to do something, there is nothing that can get in their way. Now, they're not perfect. They would probably be the first ones to say, Kent, make sure and tell them that, right? They're not perfect by any means. But these are men who genuinely, with all their heart, want to do what God wants them to do. And I have heard them say things like, that kind of is a scary idea. But if that's what God's calling us to do, we'll do it. That is what I'm talking about when I talk about a catalytic man. It is the man who does not let fear keep him from doing the things that he's supposed to do for God. Men, what is it that God's called you to do? Maybe it's not a big thing like getting up on a stage and preaching. Maybe it's just like you see a kid in the hallway every week at church and he kind of looks down and God has just whispered in your ear, hey, you need to just give that kid a high five every single week and check in on how his family's doing. You know what? I know a lot of men who would ignore that little prompting from God. They would ignore it because they'd be afraid of it. They'd be, what is it going to look like for me to give that kid a high five? What if he ignores me? What if... There's a lot of reasons to be afraid. There are only a few reasons to be a catalytic man. And I'm telling you, it's because when you're catalytic, you can inspire those around you. You don't have to be... Our elders, they do a great job getting up here and doing communion devotions, but you'll notice they're not flashy guys. Some of you may not even know who they are. But they are guys who live and walk the talk, and when God calls them to do something, they do it. Man, I would just ask you, are you willing to be a catalytic man? Or do you just want to sit there and be the Homer Simpson of the world? Would you rather be a cartoon or be catalytic? I'll tell you, I want to be catalytic. I want to be a man who, at the end of my days, people say that he inspired me. And not just inspired me from the stage, the way he lived his life on a personal level inspired me. It changed me. And I don't do it for you. I'm doing it because I love Jesus like crazy. And he was so catalytic in my life that it changes who I want to be and how I want to live. I was thinking, I have 4 kids, you know that, and our son Simon turned 3 this week. And it was super sad. Super sad because last 3-year-old we're going to have in our house, right? And it's the last time I'm going to have that birthday with that kid that he turns 3 and he's going to say, I'm free. And he takes like 5 minutes to show you the 3 fingers. And I just, maybe I'm a super sentimental guy or something, but I look at that stuff and I think about how do I soak up every minute right now? Because I've had enough. Being in my position, it's kind of odd. I get a lot of people giving me advice and saying stuff to me, and I've had enough of you say to me, Kent, you better like soak it up now because it goes by fast, right? Can I get an amen on that? Right? And so I have been soaking it up. Like, I don't want to miss a moment of those kids' lives. Some of you know, I will tell you sometimes I'm not going to come and do something with you because I'm hanging out with my kids. Because I don't want to miss it right now. I don't want to miss it. And I want my kids to have a memory in my life of their life with me that their dad was a man who was a man of valor. That I did what was right even when it was hard. That I was catalytic in other people's lives. That the kind of people I surrounded myself with, that it challenges how my kids want to surround themselves as they grow up, right? I want to be an example to them. I want to be catalytic. I want to be a man who reflects who my Father in heaven is. There was a band in the 1990s. It was a Christian band. And they were called 90 Pound Wuss. I know that's kind of a weird name, right? But where they got their name from was they were a punk rock band, which if you don't know what that is, it's probably okay. You're a blessed person. So they were a punk rock band. And they used to play in bars, even though they were a Christian band, because they thought, who needs to hear more about Jesus than people in bars? And so they were playing in a bar, and this guy afterwards had one too many, and he was like, man, why do you guys sing about Jesus? And they were like, oh, we love him, and he saved our life. And the guy was like, he was just a 90-pound wuss. And so they decided to name their band after Jesus, the 90-pound wuss. See, I think, men, I bring that up not to be crass or not, I bring it up Because I think most men in our culture look at you for sitting in this room right now as kind of a wuss. They look at you and they think going to church is for men who are wimps, men who don't have strength in their life, men who aren't strong. This is not something that strong men do. Would you agree that that's how the world views being a part of a church, being a Christian, being a follower of Christ? I want to tell you something. My Savior is not a 90-pound wuss. He is a ferocious lion. And when you have been in His presence and you have walked away unscathed, that's something you want to talk about. Because you have been in the presence of power and greatness and something that could envelop you and destroy you like that. And yet you walk away from it. That is something that the whole world should know about. That is something that a man of strength and power can imbibe and live in and revel in. The church needs men who will stand up and be strong men of faith. Men who reflect the power of their Savior. He was not a wuss. He was magnificent. He was strength embodied. Can you imagine how much strength it takes to shove all of godhood into this measly flesh of a man and to hold it without bursting it? Can you imagine the strength it takes to not just pop the nails out of the wood and not just ravage the world for doing what they did to him on one of these 2,000 years ago? He was a man of strength. And I am calling you men today. I am calling you out. Let's stop being the picture of what most people think of church men, that we are church mice, that we sit back and we're wimps, and we don't stand up for what's right. We don't fight. I am calling you to be strong like your Savior, to be a man, to not lose it, to not give up what makes you a man, but instead to submit it to Him and let Him take hold of it and make you into a true living man who has been in the presence of something great and powerful, and nay, I say, even awful in its power. Do you not know that He could smite you like that? It is something to have been in that presence and to still remain standing. This morning, men, I want to invite you. Stop being a wuss. I want to invite you to be a man. We're going to sing a song at the cross. And I'm going to invite you to do something that's tough. I'm going to invite you to stand up. I'm going to ask ladies that you remain sitting. Not that you couldn't stand, not that you ladies don't need to stand for Christ, but I'm going to invite the men to stand up. And after we've sung the song a couple times or through a little bit, ladies, you're welcome to join them. But I want to invite you men to stand up, and I want you to really, for real, consider in your life, are you willing to feel as uncomfortable as you do standing in here just as the men? Are you willing to feel that uncomfortable standing for Christ in your life? Are you willing to do what it takes to be a man of courage and valor in the places that you live and work?